So, as I've been preparing for this talk, I noticed I was becoming quite anxious about really trying to get some precision and making sure that I really understood what was being talked about. And then this kind of wisdom emerged, which is, well, firstly, what we're talking about is the understanding of the Aryas, the understanding of the noble ones, that which those who are sort of awakened, or at least have seen emptiness and seen the truth, this is what they understand. So it's not likely that I'm going to understand. And so what I reflected on is the example that Lama brings up in her book, which is the story of Ashvajit meeting Shariputra. And it's this that I'd like us to just take a moment and reflect on, which is Shariputra had been seeking for the words of truth and for enlightenment for a long time. And then he came and he met Ashvajit, and there was something about the way that Ashvajit was, his deportment and the way he carried himself. And he said, "Who's your teacher? What teachings does he have?" And Ashvajit says, "Well, actually, I'm just newly ordained. I haven't really kind of fully understood. I can't say that I really would be able to say what the teacher says." And he says, "Please, just some words." And Ashvajit says the words of truth, which I didn't prepare before we came in. Yedama hetu prabhava hetam tesham tatagato hyavada tesham chaya naroda evam vadi mahashramana svaha. So I didn't prepare it. Luckily, we recite that as a mantra, so I sort of knew it, which is all the dharmas have a cause, and the Buddha has taught the cause and also its cessation. Something like that. And that's so in line with what I'm going to teach today. And as Ashvajit said it, Shariputra got some kind of awakening, some kind of zeal for realizing this is the truth. I know this is the truth. Now I will go and find your teacher, and I want to realize that for myself. So so even though Ashvajit was saying that he didn't really understand, there was something about Shariputra's openness and readiness and willing to hear the truth, that he received a direct transmission from the Buddha. So that's what I'm encouraging, is for us to open to these are the teachings that come directly from the Buddha. And if we're open and aligning with this mandala of awakening, that we might actually receive the transmission of that, all of us. That would be impressive, wouldn't it? And as I remembered that, and as I reflected on this sort of tension that I was getting from, I've got to make it clear, I've got to make it right. It's only ever going to be the transmission of the Buddha. So I can relax. And I would like to apologize in advance if I make things unclear, if I muddy the clear waters of these teachings. I'd also apologize to any scholars that are out there for any the jumping between Pali and Sanskrit that goes on. Well, the texts that I was reading while I was in retreat were in Pali, but Lama has Sanskrit background, and so when we talk, I notice we jump between Sanskrit and Pali quite readily. So anyone who actually knows the Pali and the Sanskrit, please kind of hold that with a certain looseness. So, the teachings on Praticca Samutpada, I'm going to begin with what is possibly the most vital piece of information, which I call Ananda's mistake, which is Ananda comes to the Buddha and he says, these teachings on dependent arising, they're so deep and profound and so clear, or they're so deep and so profound, and yet they seem so clear to me. And the Buddha says, don't say that. Say not so. Yes, they are deep and they are profound. But it's because the people of the world don't fully understand how all of these teachings, I'm going to paraphrase here. He says it's like a tangled mesh, like a tangled ball of string. I think there's a word called skein. I don't really know what it is, but I think it's like a dreadlock. It's trying to unpick these teachings is like trying to unpick a dreadlock. There are threads leading in and out and all between. And so I really want to bring this right up front, because whenever these teachings are presented, it's always in this kind of the 12 links of dependent origination, or the 12 links of arising. And it starts off with avidya, ignorance, and it ends up with birth and death, as if this is a one thing leads into another, leads into the next, leads into the next. And the Buddha is saying it's not that simple. So keep that in mind as we go forward. And the other thing that we mentioned this morning, but I think is probably worth reiterating, is this is not a theory about the world. And sorry, my Siri's going off. This is not a theory about whether reality, what is reality, what is existence. This is not a philosophical view that we can say, this is now what I understand. Because if it were a view, the Buddha makes it quite clear in the first sutta of the Digha Nikaya, the long discourses, the first sutta, he says, all of these people that hold a view about existence or the universe or the world or the cosmos or self or other, and he's talking about people, eternalists and annihilationists and all these kinds of people that have very complicated views. He dismisses them all with a single line, which is, all of these views are created by grasping, which is from craving to existence, which arises from a feeling out of contact with something that appears in the mind. And because of that, it is dukkha. It is just a view. And so the Buddha is saying, I am not teaching philosophical views. I am teaching only these things: suffering, the cause of suffering, the cessation of suffering, and the path. So we really have to bear that in mind as we're looking at this. This is not about a theory we can base our life on or come to sort of understand anything. This is a meditative practitioner's realization. So I'll remind us of the text that Lama mentioned earlier, the Kachana Gotra Sutra, Kachana Gotra Sutra. And the Buddha, when he's asked about what right view is, he says that this world is mostly bound by this duality, that everything exists or everything does not exist. And he says, when you understand the arising or the origination of the world with correct understanding, and here the word correct understanding is samma prajna. It's the prajna, the sort of intelligence, the understanding that comes from right view, which is founded in right view. So when you see the origin of the world with right understanding, you wouldn't have the notion, or you wouldn't be able to say that it doesn't exist. As Lama said this morning, if you're looking at suffering, or if you're looking at the world and you're seeing it arise, you wouldn't say it doesn't exist. And it's really important to keep this in mind, because we're not talking about a theory of existence. And if you saw the cessation of that world with right understanding, you wouldn't have any notion, or you wouldn't say that it existed. And this is a very profound point. So, what is he calling here? Well, maybe it's important to pick up on what he's calling here of the world is what I've got in this diagram. If you haven't looked, don't worry, you can catch up. But this diagram, which is the world is everything that he describes under Pratitya Samutpada, the 12 links of origination of suffering. Whenever you say you see the origination of dukkha, he is also talking about the origination of the world. So there's the great sutta that we mention often, sometimes in the body awareness things, which is, what's it called? Rohitassa Sutta, where the deva or someone comes to the Buddha and he says, I've travelled as fast as I can and I haven't been able to find the end of suffering. I've travelled through the cosmos and I haven't been able to find the end of suffering. And the Buddha says, yeah, you wouldn't be able to find the end of suffering by travelling the cosmos. But it's within this fathom-long body that you will find the origination of the cosmos. And the word cosmos there is a translation of the world, loka. So it's the same word. When within this fathom-long body you see the origination of the world and the cessation of the world. It's the same process. And that's important because you don't find it anywhere else other than right here in our immediate experience. The origination of dukkha, the cessation of dukkha, the origination of the world, the cessation of the world is to be known and experienced directly in this very body. So, if we've got the map of the world here, we start with death, aging and death. And aging and death comes into existence or is given rise to because of the presence of birth, existence, grasping, craving, feeling, contact, the sense bases, name, form, consciousness, samskaras, and avijja. So it all looks like a nice, tidy package. So you would normally see it in a line. So I've drawn it here in this map a little bit more sort of mixed up and drawn around. It doesn't matter if you don't have it. The teachings here are to say all of this is the whole mass of suffering. Everything on this page is what the Buddha is giving the term the world and dukkha. So when you see the origination of this, and when you see the cessation of this. So there's no sort of, let's say, philosophical theory about another external reality other than the one that we are immediately experiencing right now. So, this is dukkha. The question arises then when the Buddha is asked, what is dukkha? What is dukkha? He always says aging and death, or he says birth, aging, death. And then the sorrow, the grief, the trauma, the pain, the distress, depression, all of these words. This is what dukkha is. And this is the continued process of birth, aging, death, rebirth. So this is what gets called samsara. Now that seems fairly kind of straightforward, especially if you have some kind of existing belief in reincarnation of some kind. But I found a couple of very interesting suttas where the Buddha makes a very interesting statement where he says, those ascetics and Brahmins, these practitioners, these holy people who don't understand old age and death, I don't call them real practitioners. Only those practitioners who really understand old age and death, they are who I call practitioners. So it is sort of pointing us here at, it's not simply what we would common sense perceive to be birth, old age, death. So it needs to be looked a little bit closer. And when you have a look at what is birth, what is death, you get these lists of synonyms. Now, and when I've listened to Theravadan monks talk about this, they are basically words that they all say exactly the same thing. They all mean birth, they all mean death, just as we would consider birth and death. And maybe that's right, but coming from this tradition and looking a little bit closer, and you find that some of these words actually, when you look to see, well, are they all saying exactly the same thing, or are they different examples of what the Buddha is calling birth? Are they different examples of what the Buddha is calling death? So some of these words are, so birth, arising, appearing, producing, manifesting, and the taking hold of the skandhas. These are all words for birth. Dying, death, ceasing, disappearing, vanishing, the breaking up of the skandhas. And these are all words for death. So we can start to see already, if we're only looking at our immediate experience, we get a sense in which anything that appears, anything that disappears, can be called arising, ceasing, birth, dying. And going back to the Kaccanagotta Sutta, when you see the world in this way, you have no doubt that what arises is just dukkha arising. And what ceases is just dukkha ceasing. So I'll just, before we go into what is arising or ceasing, I'll just bring in a couple of other forms of the dependent arising formula, which is quite important to keep in mind, I think. It's called the Idappaccayata, and it says, when this is, that is. With the arising of this, this arises. When this isn't, that isn't. With the cessation of this, this ceases. And I think it's really important because when you look at it going backwards in the way that the Buddha does, if there is death, there must be birth. So with the arising of birth, there must be death. And this is a really important. It's often presented in terms of our linear progression. When there is birth, then at some point there will be death. And this is pointed to, no, when there is death, there is birth. When there is birth, there is death. These things can't be separated, which brings us to kind of Nagarjuna's work, which is, if you can't have death without birth, and if you can't have birth without death, what does it mean to say they are separate things? And if they can't exist separately, how can you say that they are what we think they are? At what point does one become the other? And this is really important in terms of thinking about what the whole mandala of confusion is. It is kind of the whole death is enfolded within birth, which is enfolded within becoming, enfolded within grasping, enfolded within craving. And all of it is enfolded because of this delusion of avijja. And avijja is wrong view. It is not seeing the true nature of reality, or not seeing appearances as they really are, not seeing birth and death as they really are. Because if you see them as they really are, that's not avijja. And because avijja is the basis for the whole of the mass of dukkha, when avijja ceases, dukkha ceases. And then you've got the next term up from avijja is samskaras. And it's a really interesting term. And I won't go into kind of all of the technical terms, but essentially this is all compounded dharmas, all compounded everything that comes into being because of not seeing the true nature of reality. And this has those three characteristics, which is, it is impermanent, it is dukkha, and it is not fit to be regarded as self. Because which is a really important point, especially when we come to some of the teachings that Lama has presented to us over the years about the nature of self and not self. This is very clear in the Pali to say what is impermanent is dukkha. And if it is dukkha, it is subject to change, it has any kind of relationship with arising and ceasing, it is not fit to be regarded as self. Because the true nature of reality, and the implication here is the true nature of reality is non-arising, non-ceasing, it is the unconditioned, the unborn. So if you don't have the sense that there is an unborn, unceasing nature to be realized, the only thing there is, which is often what happens, is just the conditioned manifestations that are impermanent. And then you hear, okay, so if it's impermanent, we just have to realize it's impermanent. Just stop grasping at those things as if they were permanent. Just let them go. It's the natural flow of birth and death, and it's the beautiful flow of nature. Well, no, that's kind of what the Indian society had already understood. That we live, okay, this is my karma. I just accept my karma and I live my best life. And then in my next life, I'll be reborn with a better future. And the Buddha is saying, no, it's not that. If it has the nature of impermanence, it is dukkha. It is a samskara. It is a conditioned thing. It is conditioned by avijja, by not seeing the truth. And there's no way out until you see the truth. Because it's perpetuated. It's created and perpetuated, reinforced, recreated because of what we'll come to see in a moment, the grasping and the craving. So when we hear these sort of things on Praticca Samuppada being and the modern world, it's about cause and effect. This is saying it doesn't really work like that. Birth isn't the cause of an effect that is death. If these things can't be separated, one thing does not cause the other. They are intimately bound within the whole mandala of avijja. I was going to think about some analogy for it, and the only one I could think of was the chicken and the egg, which is how it often goes, where you see the paradox there. The egg at any point, is it the effect of the chicken or is it the cause of the chicken? And this is saying that doesn't make any sense. Once you see what is really there, it's just thinking that creates the past and the future. It's grasping that creates it. That's without going into any of the sort of the meditations on what is it that actually makes up something that we call an egg. So we'll come to that. So when we're looking at this whole mass of appearances, appearance, arising, ceasing, disappearing, one of the quotes, Lama didn't read out this morning because I think I'm right in saying the next two lines, the all exists is one extreme, the all doesn't exist, this is another extreme. And I think it's not in the Sanskrit, which is a very interesting thing on its own. I was listening to a Theravadian bhikkhu who suggested that, does that mean that the Sanskrit took it out or that the Theravadins put it in? And there's something to reflect on. Because the word all exists, I think, is the name of the school, Sarvastavadin or something, that may have created some of these Sanskrit texts later. So it could be a Theravadin sort of commentary to say, you can't say everything exists. But maybe that's just a sidetrack. So, when he says the all exists, all dharmas exist, what does he mean by all? And there's a very important sutta called Sabba, the all. And like they all do, what is it? You keep saying the all. What does that mean? And the Buddha says, when there is eye and what the eye sees, the nose and what the nose smells, ear, sounds, tongue, tastes, body, tactiles, mind, and dharmas. This is what we call the all. This is what... and then he follows up by saying, and if somebody were to try and describe anything outside of that, they wouldn't be able to, because it's outside the remit of that kind of language. So this is all we're talking about. What appears to the senses. However, interestingly, it says mind and thoughts, and the word for thoughts here is dharma, plural. So all dharmas are included in here. So Kaccanagotta Sutta says, all exists, this is one extreme. And all doesn't exist, this is another extreme. So if we go back, when you see the origination of this all, you wouldn't say it doesn't exist, because you've seen it arise. But when you see the cessation of this, you wouldn't say it doesn't exist. So the Buddha's teaching the middle way, which is the truth of this, the truth about the arising or the origination of this, and the cessation of this. And then the path how to realize that. So, everything here is suffering. What arises, the grasping, the arising, changing, ceasing, the continual cycle. And we move into the origination of it, or the cause of it, or the arising of it. And this is where I was mentioning the pointing out comes in here, which is all of these dharmas have their place of origin in craving. And there are three kinds of craving. The craving for the pleasure that you get from these sensory impressions that comes from the all. That's one kind of craving. The other kinds of craving are the craving for existence and the craving for non-existence. And of course, if we put this into context with Kaccanagotta, all this exists. We want all of this existence. This is what we call existence, and we crave it. Or we don't want it. That's another kind of craving. And I think one of the things that we have to be quite careful of, because we are talking now about how to meditate on this. What I said earlier, when the Buddha says, and where is the origination of this suffering? It's in craving. And wherever there is pleasure in what appears to the senses, wherever there is pleasure, that right there, that is where craving originates. And it's not enough to say, so therefore you stop craving sensual pleasures. Just detach yourself from them. Because the Buddha makes it clear, he's not saying that. He's saying you stay right there. You have to look at what craving is. You have to look at why you crave. You have to look at what it is that you're craving. What is the nature of that craving? How does it give you pleasure? What is the fallback? What is the What is the failing of it? And this sense of existence and non-existence is really key here, I think, because on a very fundamental level, craving for existence is fear of annihilation. And if you have fear of annihilation, it is because we are grasping at a wrong view of self. Because when you see the true nature of being, that cannot be annihilated. So if you have a fear of annihilation, you are grasping at wrong views, which brings in the next one, which is grasping, upadana. And of the kinds of grasping that there are, views about self, views about reality, and sense pleasures are three of those. And of course, that would only happen because of a wrong view. And then you go back to the basis for the whole thing. And it's really interesting that the word for grasping is upadana, and it's the same word for fuel. And it's this continued grasping that continually fuels the process of craving, grasping, existence, more wrong view, and so on. And it creates these, the reinforcement of our habitual patterns, the latent tendencies towards liking or disliking. The reason why we keep thinking that we are going to satisfy this underlying fear of annihilation by grasping at what appears is because we haven't understood the world, we haven't understood the all, we haven't understood existence, because we keep grasping at this, which is a mistaken view. And you can see then how these ideas, it's not simply this happens, then this happens, then this happens, then this happens. If there's grasping, it's because of wrong view. And it recreates wrong view. If there's craving for existence, it's because of wrong view. If we see this world as separate from our own experience, it's wrong view. So if there is arising and dying, it is because of wrong view. Which is why when you get that vision of the noble ones, the vision of right view, everything that we're calling dukkha would cease. Because it only comes into existence because of wrong view. It's very deep. I'll just say one more thing about the craving and fear. This is a reflection that Patty and I have been talking about a lot recently, which is how deep this the need for belonging is, and the fear of not belonging. Because if you don't belong to this mandala and you're exiled from this mandala, you won't belong in another. And so all of our sort of behavior and all of our drive comes to making sure that we stay within the mandala of the family, the mandala of our spiritual community, the mandala of work, and we do everything that we can to make sure that we're not exiled. Because if we were exiled, it might mean, on a very deep level, who am I if I'm not this? Who am I if I don't belong to them? Because we have a wrong view of self. And that goes really very deep. It drives our behavior, it drives our choices. And another word for the samskaras is choices. And you can see how the pattern continues. there's a certain quality here of hopelessness. Because if we're trapped in this continued cycle of grasping and arising and ceasing and grasping at what arises, and it's an illusion, it slips through our fingers, and it all has a wrong view. How do you get right view? Because the cycle continues as long as there is wrong view. So how do you get out of that? And of course, mostly what we find is it's our fear of this suffering, our longing to be free of it, that keeps us trapped, because it's part of the same cycle. We're still craving. We're craving the end of it. We wish it wasn't here. And yet, it's that longing to be free from suffering that maybe perversely is what doesn't let us rest. Because there is some intuitive sense that we know this is not true. Because otherwise, why would we care? Why would we want to get rid of it? Of course, because we don't have, or we don't fully trust that there is anything other than the world that we know. Of course, we just settle on these temporary fixes of pleasure or avoidance of pain and so on, which of course perpetuates it. So it's hopeless. Thankfully, the Buddha did manage to appear in our world and did manage to say, I've understood it. I've realized it. I know that it ceases. And I know what that reality is when it ceases. And that's what the Bodhisattvas realize. That's what, in the Heart Sutra, avijja is deception. Deception means there is fear. And the Bodhisattvas, because there is no deception, there is no fear. The Buddhas have seen it and they have pointed it out. So there is a way out. And we'll have a look at this more tomorrow, but I'll just sort of quickly point to it. And the way out, there's a sutta called the Upanisa Sutta where it goes through this whole 12 links of dependent origination, and it says, the way out is faith. The way out is confidence in that which goes beyond birth and death, that which is not subject to arising or ceasing, and that has been pointed out by the Buddha. So then you get into another set of dependent conditions. How do you get faith? What is faith? And it says, faith is what breaks through the hindrances. Faith is knowing that wholesome states of mind, meditation, the right kind of mindfulness and awareness, the right kind of attention, the right kind of connections will allow you to hear the true Dharma, which is being pointed out by somebody who has deep connections to the lineage, a good spiritual friend. And with this, when that faith breaks through, it has qualities of tranquility, of joy, of openness and clarity. And this becomes the basis, the shamatha, for really investigating when we see form, when we see appearances, we get to see them as they really are. And we know this is not self. And when we see that, we become disenchanted with the whole illusion. And it's from that point that freedom from that enchantment can start to happen. Freedom from the influences of greed, hate, and delusion. So, it may be hopeless, but only in the sense that we have to give up trying to find what is unborn, trying to find the deathless in the world that we're grasping. And that needs to be pointed out to us. And we need to have confidence in Lamas. In Discovering the Heart of Buddhism, we talk about it in terms of confidence in the power of our own discernment, confidence in the truth that we're seeing and that we're looking at, the confidence to apply that in practice, and the confidence in the indestructible heart essence. And when we come with this as a foundation, with the heart wish to be liberated from suffering, to know that there is a truth from suffering, then the nature of our own being is revealed: openness, clarity, sensitivity. So there is a way out. It's not all hopeless, thankfully. And there's a lot more to be said and a lot more subtlety to be drawn out. But I think that's probably enough for today. So, that was quick. I was going to say if there are any questions, but maybe I'll just ask Lama. Lama Shenpen, anything that you'd like to add to that before we close this session and send people off into discussion groups?
So can you hear me?
Mm-hmm.
No, nothing particular. As you say, there are many subtleties there. There's lots of points that we could examine in more depth, experientially, but I like the way you brought it all back down to where we are with discovering the Heart of Buddhism, the whole approach. And I think that's already something worth discussing, isn't it? I don't know, did you have a particular question in mind for the discussion? I can't remember what we decided.
How have the presentation that we've put through today, how have we noticed that this has changed anything about our approach to practice, or our approach to indestructible heart essence, or maybe just how have we seen this in the light of our DHB teaching so far?
That's an interesting question. Yeah.
And then tomorrow I'll talk a bit more about that sort of path out and how that relates to our meditation and stuff, so I can go into that a little bit more and we can talk about that tomorrow.
From my point of view, as you're discussing this and noticing questions, then do write them down, get them sent through so that I can think about them tomorrow afternoon. So it will just be the start of the conversation, basically. So it doesn't matter how basic your question is, go for it. Go for it. And then then I can see, well, both of us can see that where we need to go next, and have a go at just drawing out a few more threads, and Ashley can help me with that. So, good. Thank you very much, Ashley. That was. I didn't catch the names of all the sutras you mentioned.
I've put them all in the materials page, or most of them. With links, so kind of almost all the all the talk I was giving is based on those quotes that I put in the some sources, and they all have links to the original suttas. So you should be able to click and find them.
I'll have another go, because when I went through that, I found suttas that didn't seem to be relevant. That's quite how I managed to.
Maybe I put the wrong links in. Or maybe I'm paraphrasing.
Well, that all leads to further discussion, doesn't it?
Mm-hmm.
I get stirred up. He didn't say that.
Should we dedicate? We dedicate this punya to the enlightenment of all sentient beings.
May all sentient beings realize complete and perfect awakening.
May the heart's awareness awaken in the unawakened. Where it has begun to stir, may it never fade, and may it awaken fully.